I don't think anything ever gets fully healed. I think you learn how to live with certain feelings, you learn how to navigate them, and you start learning how to respond instead of react. And if you think, because you've buried something far enough down, that you don't think about it anymore, because life might feel a little bit quieter now, that it's just gonna stay there, it won't. Buried things do not disappear. They wait, and they don't come back as memories, they come back as behavior. That's the part of healing that people skip. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Rebuild Different. I'm Epiphany Page, and today we're talking about the part of healing that everybody skips. The part where the things you thought that you had buried start showing up in your behavior. And again, I want to preface this by saying I am not a doctor and I am not a therapist. Again, everything that I share is through lived experience. And what I've learned is healing is not a finish line. It's not about becoming calm forever or never being triggered again. Healing is contrast. And it's noticing things like, oh, old me would have handled that differently. And that awareness doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet and sometimes confusing. I started noticing that in myself. There were moments where I would pause and think, old Paige definitely would have popped off at that. And I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel enlightened. I just noticed that I wasn't reacting in the same way. And then something else happened. I started seeing glimpses of myself, of my old self, in other people. The defensiveness, the intensity, the hair trigger reactions. But instead of judgment, I felt sympathy. Because I've been there. And a lot of what we push down doesn't necessarily feel dramatic at the time. Sometimes it sounds like, oh, that wasn't that bad. That was so long ago. I'm fine now. But what we don't process doesn't disappear. It just changes form. If you grew up emotionally unsupported, that pain can often turn into hyperindependence. If you lived in chaos or unpredictability, it turns into control. And if you were punished for having emotions, it can turn into shutdown. And sometimes when your reactions don't match the moment, it's not always immaturity. It could be unprocessed experience. For me, survival mode didn't look like silence. I was talking about my pain. I was naming it out loud. And I thought that if I could just say it, or if I could just articulate it, that I was helping myself heal. And in some ways I was. But I didn't have the necessary tools yet. And I didn't have the support. And I didn't know how to move from awareness into change. So the same stories kept looping. I wasn't stuck because I didn't understand what hurt. I was stuck because I didn't know how to respond differently to it. Because there's a big difference between expressing pain and learning how to live outside of it. And when you've been in survival mode for a really long time, your energy is going to go towards staying afloat, not building new skills. You can't. And that's not a personal failure. That's a gap in support. This is the part that people skip. Healing eventually asks you to turn towards those uncomfortable memories, the moments that you don't want to revisit, the versions of yourself that you've outgrown, not to relive them, but to understand them. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about updating the story that your nervous system is still telling. So what does healing actually look like? Well, it can look like pausing instead of reacting, noticing without shaming yourself, and realizing this feels familiar, but doesn't belong here anymore. You don't stop feeling those things, you just stop letting them run the room. All right, guys, that's another episode of Rebuild Different. Thanks again for being here. And if this episode resonated with you, if you saw yourself or someone that you know in any of these patterns, nothing about that means that you're behind. It means that you're paying attention. And paying attention to your own self is where the real change starts. See you next week.